It had been 3 weeks since I had finalized the purchase of the entire residential block. 7 buildings, 96 units, and one apparently tyrannical homeowners association. The property had been a remarkable investment opportunity, beautiful location, solid structures, but mysteriously high tenant turnover and declining property values. The previous owner had been vague about community issues, but the numbers were too good to pass up. I needed to understand what I had actually purchased. That morning, I decided to walk the grounds myself. I dressed comfortably in jeans and a plain t-shirt, nothing that would announce my status as the new owner. I wanted authentic interactions, to see the community as it truly operated when no one was watching. The spring air was crisp as I strolled between buildings, making mental notes about landscaping improvements and potential structural updates. I was examining an irrigation system near Building C when I felt someone approaching from behind. The clicking of heels on concrete grew louder until they stopped abruptly behind me. "Excuse me, what exactly do you think you are doing here?" I turned to find a woman in her 50s, with immaculate blonde hair styled into a rigid bob. Her cream-colored pantsuit looked expensive, and her posture communicated absolute authority. Her lips were pulled into a tight line as she waited for my response. "Good morning," I said pleasantly. "I am just having a look around." Her eyebrows shot up as if I had said something outrageous. "Having a look around? This is a private community. You cannot just wander in here and loiter. Who are you with? Are you a guest of a resident?" "I am actually new to the area," I responded truthfully. "I am getting familiar with the neighborhood." Her expression hardened. She looked me up and down, taking in my casual attire with unconcealed disapproval. "This is an exclusive community with standards," she said coldly. "People like you do not belong here. I am Patricia Wilkins, president of the Homeowners Association, and I have not approved any new residents matching your description." The implication in her tone was unmistakable. I noticed how she maintained extra distance between us, her handbag clutched a little tighter against her side. "I do not understand. What do you mean by people like me?" I asked, keeping my voice level despite the anger beginning to simmer. "You know exactly what I mean," she replied dismissively. "Where is your identification? What unit are you claiming to be associated with? I am calling security right now unless you can prove you belong here." She pulled out her phone and held it threateningly. I could have ended this immediately by revealing my ownership, but something told me to wait. If this was how she treated me, how was she treating the actual residents? "I have every right to be here," I stated calmly. "We will see about that." She began dialing, turning slightly away from me. "Security, this is Patricia Wilkins. I have an unauthorized individual by Building C who refuses to identify himself. Please come immediately." As she made her call, an elderly gentleman emerged from a nearby unit. He glanced at the scene unfolding, then quickly averted his eyes and hurried in the opposite direction. His reaction spoke volumes. Patricia ended her call with a satisfied smirk. "Security will escort you out momentarily. We maintain certain standards here, and trespassers are not tolerated." Rather than argue, I simply nodded and said, "I look forward to meeting security." She seemed taken aback by my calm response, perhaps expecting protest or confrontation. Before she could respond further, I turned and walked toward a nearby bench. Patricia hesitated, then marched away with a final warning shot over her shoulder. "Do not come back unless invited by a legitimate resident." As she disappeared around the corner, a middle-aged woman who had been watching from her balcony cautiously approached me. "I would be careful around Patricia if I were you," she whispered. She makes life miserable for anyone she takes a dislike to. Half the people who moved out last year did so because of her. Is that so? I asked. Does she treat everyone this way? The woman glanced nervously in the direction Patricia had gone. Only those she thinks cannot fight back. She and her bored friends run this place like their personal kingdom. Anyway, I should go before she sees me talking to you. She hurried away, leaving me with much to consider. Security never actually arrived. Perhaps they knew better than to follow Patricia's every whim. But I had learned something valuable in this encounter. This was not just about one unpleasant woman. There was a systemic problem here, one that affected real people's lives. And now, whether Patricia Wilkins knew it or not, I owned the kingdom she thought she ruled. The encounter with Patricia lingered in my mind throughout the day. That evening, I contacted the property management company I had retained and requested complete records of all HOA complaints, violations, and board meeting minutes for the past 3 years. Something did not feel right, and my instincts rarely led me astray in business matters. 3 days later, I sat in my temporary office downtown, surrounded by boxes of documents. What I discovered made my blood run cold. The pattern was unmistakable once laid out chronologically. Residents with names suggesting diverse backgrounds received 3 times more violation notices than others. Families with children were cited for noise disturbances at rates far exceeding reasonable expectations. Elderly residents on fixed incomes faced punitive fines for infractions as minor as having flower pots that were the wrong shade of terracotta. I created a spreadsheet tracking all violations by resident, noting demographics I could determine from the records. The data painted a disturbing picture of selective enforcement and targeted harassment. Even more concerning were the financial records. The HOA had accumulated substantial reserves, but large sums disappeared into vague categories like administrative expenses and professional consultations without proper documentation. I picked up my phone and called Marcus, an old law school friend who specialized in housing discrimination. "Marcus, I need a confidential consultation," I said when he answered. "You know my rates," he joked before turning serious. "What is going on?" I explained the situation, detailing the patterns I had uncovered and my encounter with Patricia. "This sounds like textbook discrimination," Marcus said after I finished. "The selective enforcement alone raises serious fair housing concerns. Add the financial irregularities and you potentially have fraud as well. As the property owner, you could face liability if you do not address it." "I want to do more than just address it," I replied. "I want to fix the entire system. These people have been suffering under this regime for years." "Proceed carefully," Marcus warned. "Gather more evidence before confronting anyone directly. Board members often protect each other. You will need ironclad documentation." After ending the call, I continued my investigation. The management company provided tenant contact information, and I began making discreet inquiries, framing my questions as part of a standard property evaluation. The stories I heard grew increasingly disturbing. A Nigerian doctor described how his application for a security camera was denied, while his white neighbor's identical request was approved the same week. An elderly Chinese couple detailed how Patricia had thrown away the traditional herbs they were growing in their small garden patch, calling them exotic weeds that violated landscaping guidelines. Most heartbreaking was my conversation with Sarah Johnson, a young single mother who had moved away 6 months prior. "I could not take it anymore," she explained over the phone, her voice still carrying the weight of the experience. The constant complaints about my son playing too loudly during daylight hours. The fines for having his bicycle visible on our patio. Patricia even sent notices claiming my work schedule violated HOA rules because I sometimes left for night shifts after quiet hours began. We were not wealthy enough or the right kind of people for her community. She made that very clear without saying those exact words. The next day, I spoke with a former maintenance worker who had quit the previous year. Patricia and the board members, they are all connected, he revealed hesitantly. Her brother-in-law got the landscaping contract even though his bid was higher than others. The treasurer's husband handles all the renovation approvals and inspections. They created rules specifically to benefit their friends and punish anyone they do not like. I reviewed the HOA board membership history and confirmed his allegations. The same 6 people had rotated positions for years, maintaining control through procedural technicalities and scheduling meetings when working residents could not attend. The election process was technically legal, but designed to prevent any new voices from gaining influence. That evening, I sat in a coffee shop near the property, organizing my findings. The picture was clear. Patricia Wilkins did not merely have an unpleasant personality. She had established a discriminatory system that enriched her inner circle while driving away residents who did not fit her preferred profile. The HOA had become her personal fiefdom, and the other board members were either complicit or too intimidated to challenge her. I closed my laptop and made a decision. I would not confront Patricia immediately with my ownership status. That would only address one symptom of a deeper problem. Instead, I would experience the situation firsthand, gathering evidence that could not be dismissed or explained away. The only way to truly understand the depth of the problem was to become part of the community itself. I needed to walk in the shoes of those who had suffered under Patricia's reign. I needed to become a resident, not just an owner. I called my assistant. Prepare the paperwork for me to move into Unit 214 in Building E. Use my middle name on the lease. I do not want any connection to the ownership records. Are you sure about this, sir? She asked, concern evident in her voice. Absolutely, I replied. Some problems cannot be solved from a distance, and this one requires personal involvement. As I ended the call, I felt a sense of purpose I had not experienced in years. This was no longer just about protecting my investment. It was about justice for people who had been silenced and marginalized in what should have been their home. I moved into Unit 214 the following week. It was a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the 2nd floor of Building E, intentionally chosen for its location, with a direct view of the community center, where HOA meetings were held. The previous tenant had moved out after receiving multiple violations for unauthorized decorative elements, which turned out to be cultural items from her homeland. I furnished the apartment sparsely, bringing only essentials. My goal was to blend in as a typical middle-income resident. I introduced myself to neighbors using my middle name, Alexander, claiming I worked from home as a data analyst. No one connected me to the property ownership, exactly as planned. It took precisely 3 days for my first HOA violation notice to appear on my door. The offense: improper window covering color. All blinds must be white or off-white as per Community Guidelines Section 7.3. My blinds were cream-colored, virtually indistinguishable from off-white to any reasonable person. 2 days later, a second notice: unauthorized welcome mat design floral patterns not approved. The mat was a simple geometric pattern, not floral at all. I documented each notice meticulously, photographing them where they were posted and filing them away. I also installed small, legal security cameras inside my apartment, angled to capture the exterior hallway and the approach to my door. Within the first 2 weeks, I received 5 violation notices for increasingly trivial matters. Meanwhile, I observed multiple actual violations by other residents that went completely unaddressed. The pattern was becoming clear through personal experience. Enforcement was selective and appeared targeted. On my 11th day as a resident, I had my second direct encounter with Patricia. I was bringing groceries up to my apartment when she emerged from the elevator, clipboard in hand. She scrutinized me with immediate recognition. "Mr. Alexander, is it not?" she said, her tone clipped. "I see you have not addressed the violations regarding your window coverings." "Good afternoon, Ms. Wilkins," I replied pleasantly. "I have reviewed the HOA guidelines thoroughly and found my current blinds fall within the approved color spectrum of off-white." Her eyes narrowed. "I determine what qualifies as appropriate for this community, not new tenants who clearly do not understand our standards. You have 48 hours to replace them before fines begin accruing." "May I ask why Mrs. Henderson in Unit 217 has beige blinds without receiving violations?" I inquired innocently. Patricia's expression hardened. "Mrs. Henderson is a founding resident who has demonstrated her commitment to community values for 15 years. Her situation is different. Mind your own affairs, Mr. Alexander, and focus on coming into compliance." She turned sharply and continued her patrol of the building. As she walked away, my neighbor from Unit 212 opened his door a crack, having clearly overheard the exchange. "She will make your life miserable now," he whispered. "Once you question her authority, you go on her list." I thanked him for the warning but was secretly pleased. Going on Patricia's list was exactly my intention. Every interaction provided more evidence of her discriminatory practices. The monthly HOA meeting arrived 3 weeks into my residency. I arrived early and took a seat at the back of the community center. Approximately 30 residents trickled in, notably all similar in demographic profile. I recognized faces from my documentation. These were the residents who rarely, if ever, received violations. Patricia called the meeting to order precisely at 7:00 p.m., flanked by 5 board members who watched her with a combination of deference and nervousness. "Before addressing new business," she began, "I must remind everyone that our community standards exist for everyone's benefit. Some newer residents seem to believe these rules are optional. They are not." Her gaze swept meaningfully to where I sat. Several residents turned to look at me, then quickly averted their eye. "Yes." What followed was a masterclass in subtle manipulation. Patricia controlled every aspect of the meeting, cutting off questions with procedural objections and deferring concerns from the few who dared speak up. When a retired teacher attempted to raise an issue about playground access being restricted, Patricia smoothly pivoted. "That matter was addressed in last month's meeting, which you failed to attend. The board has already ruled on this issue. Next item." No vote was taken on any substantial matters. Instead, Patricia presented board decisions as fait accompli, while maintaining the appearance of protocol. When the financial report was presented, it consisted of vague summaries with no detailed breakdown of expenditures. After the meeting, I lingered, observing interactions. Patricia and her inner circle gathered in a tight cluster, occasionally glancing at specific residents with disapproval. The power dynamic was palpable, one group clearly in control, others merely tolerated in what should have been a democratic community organization. Outside in the parking lot, I was approached by 3 residents who had noticed my exchange with Patricia earlier in the week. "We saw how she spoke to you about your blinds," one woman said quietly. "She does this to everyone she decides does not fit her vision for this community." "Has anyone ever challenged her leadership?" I asked. They exchanged nervous glances. The oldest of the group, a man in his 60s, responded. "The last person who tried found their car vandalized the next day. No cameras caught anything, of course. The board voted against installing security cameras in the parking areas last year, despite multiple incidents." "Interesting timing," I observed. "Nothing is ever a coincidence with Patricia," the woman added. "Those of us who cannot afford to move just keep our heads down. What choice do we have?" We parted ways before drawing attention, but not before exchanging contact information. I now had allies, residents tired of living under Patricia's regime, but too intimidated to act alone. That night, I installed additional security cameras in my apartment, ensuring they captured the parking space assigned to my unit. If intimidation tactics were part of Patricia's playbook, I wanted evidence. I also sent secure messages to 15 residents who had experienced similar treatment, proposing a private meeting to discuss community improvements. My network was growing, and with it, my understanding of just how deeply Patricia's corruption had permeated every aspect of the community I now owned. Organizing the first secret meeting required careful planning. We could not use the community center or any public spaces within the property. Eventually, we settled on the public library's private study room, booked under a resident's name with no connection to our community. 7 people attended that first gathering, a cautious but determined group representing various buildings across the property. I positioned myself not as a leader but as a concerned resident eager for change. Trust built slowly as stories emerged, each more troubling than the last. Elena Rodriguez, a nurse from Building A, described how her application to install a small ramp for her mother's wheelchair visits had been denied 3 times on aesthetic grounds, while similar modifications for board members' relatives received immediate approval. James Washington, an African-American professor from Building D, detailed how his children were repeatedly cited for excessive noise when playing at normal hours, while other children faced no such scrutiny. "It is not just the harassment," James explained quietly. "It is the constant message that we do not belong here, that we are unwelcome in our own homes." By our third meeting 2 weeks later, our group had grown to 15. I brought in professional help. Marcus joined remotely as our legal advisor, and I introduced a forensic accountant friend who volunteered to examine financial records residents had managed to obtain. "What we are seeing here suggests a pattern of Fair Housing Act violations," Marcus explained to the group. "The selective enforcement based on protected characteristics could constitute discrimination. The financial irregularities potentially represent breaches of fiduciary duty." We developed a systematic approach to documentation. Each resident used a secure app to log violations, conversations, and observations, creating an organized database of evidence. Those with technical skills installed legal security cameras, capturing interactions that previously would have been Patricia's word against theirs. The forensic accountant's preliminary findings exceeded even my suspicions. HOA funds had been systematically directed to companies connected to board members. Patricia's brother-in-law's landscaping company charged 40% above market rate. The treasurer's husband's inspection business received exclusive contracts for renovation approvals. The secretary's printing company produced all HOA materials at premium prices. Most damning was the discovery of administrative bonuses paid quarterly to board members, a practice explicitly forbidden in the HOA bylaws. Over $175,000 had been distributed this way in the past 3 years alone. Our alliance grew more strategic with each meeting. We analyzed the HOA bylaws thoroughly, identifying leverage points and procedural requirements that Patricia's board had been ignoring. We documented board term limits that had been exceeded, mandatory financial disclosures never made, and election procedures improperly conducted. By our 5th meeting, we had 32 committed residents, still a minority, but growing steadily as word spread carefully through trusted networks. What we lacked in numbers, we made up for in meticulous preparation. Then came the catalyst that accelerated our timeline. Amina Hassan, a single mother from Somalia who worked as a medical technician, received an eviction notice based on unauthorized business activities in her apartment. Her supposed violation: watching her sister's children after school 3 days a week while her sister worked. Patricia told me directly that running a daycare violated zoning regulations. Amina explained through tears at our emergency meeting. When I explained they were my nieces and nephews, she said it did not matter. Non-immediate family members staying regularly constituted a business use of residential property. I reviewed Amina's lease and the HOA regulations myself. Nothing prohibited family childcare arrangements. This was a clear pretext to remove a resident Patricia had targeted from the beginning. We need to move faster than planned, I told the group that night. This eviction gives us both urgency and a clear example of discriminatory enforcement. Our legal team drafted a comprehensive cease and desist letter regarding Amina's situation, while our financial investigators compiled evidence of the board's conflicts of interest and misappropriation of funds. The following week brought another disturbing discovery. Through careful analysis of board meeting minutes, we identified a pattern of property value manipulation. Units belonging to residents on Patricia's approved list received higher valuation assessments during refinancing or sales, while those belonging to targeted residents received artificially low valuations, affecting their equity and ability to sell at fair market prices. This could constitute mortgage fraud, Marcus warned during our strategy call. The HOA is providing different valuations to different lenders based on discriminatory criteria. As our evidence mounted, Patricia's behavior grew more erratic. Security cameras captured her inspecting specific residents' doors and windows at unusual hours. Violation notices increased in both frequency and absurdity. One resident received a citation for excessive interior illumination visible from exterior because they had left a bathroom light on overnight. We were preparing our comprehensive legal strategy when we learned of Patricia's most aggressive move yet. Through a board contact who had secretly joined our coalition, we discovered plans to impose a special assessment, an additional $5,000 per unit for necessary infrastructure upgrades. The actual projects were vaguely defined, and the contracting company set to receive the funds was newly incorporated by Patricia's son-in-law. This planned financial extraction would force many residents on fixed incomes to sell. Precisely, the vulnerable residents Patricia had targeted most aggressively. This assessment is the breaking point, I told our core team during an emergency session. We cannot wait any longer to act. We finalized our strategy that night, a 3-pronged approach combining legal action, financial exposure, and community mobilization. Each team member had specific responsibilities, Each piece of evidence was cataloged and verified. We were ready to move against Patricia's regime. What we did not anticipate was the precipitating incident that would accelerate our timeline dramatically. Sometimes the most carefully laid plans must adapt to unexpected opportunities, and Patricia was about to provide exactly that. The confrontation that forced our hand occurred on a quiet Tuesday afternoon in the community garden. Mr. Chen, an 80-year-old resident who had lived in the community since its founding, tended a small plot where he grew traditional Chinese vegetables bok choy, Chinese broccoli, and bitter melon. The garden plots were designated for resident use, with specific dimensions allocated to each interested household. I was returning from a meeting with our legal team when I noticed a disturbance near the garden area. Patricia stood over Mr. Chen, who was kneeling beside his vegetables, her voice carrying across the courtyard. "Lord, these are unauthorized plantings," she declared loudly, gesturing at his carefully tended vegetables. "The approved plant list specifies ornamental vegetation only. Food cultivation is prohibited." Mr. Chen rose slowly to his feet, his weathered hands trembling slightly. "I have grown these for 15 years, he responded softly. "No one has objected before." "Well, I am objecting now," Patricia snapped, pulling a camera from her purse and photographing the garden plot. Section 12.4 of the Landscaping Guidelines clearly states that all vegetation must be from the approved ornamental list. These foreign vegetables are not approved. I remained at a distance, recording the interaction discreetly on my phone as Patricia continued her public humiliation of the elderly man. "Furthermore," she continued, picking up a small hand trowel from Mr. Chen's gardening basket, "these tools must be stored in the designated storage shed, not left in the garden area." She confiscated his gardening tools, placing them in a plastic bag. "These will be held at the HOA office. You may reclaim them after paying the violation fee." Mr. Chen stood motionless, shoulders slumped in defeat as Patricia wrote out a violation notice and thrust it into his hands. "Clear these plants by tomorrow, or grounds maintenance will remove them and additional fines will be assessed to your account." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the pathway, leaving Mr. Chen alone beside the garden he had tended for over a decade. I approached him after Patricia had disappeared from view. "Mr. Chen, I am very sorry this happened," I said gently. "May I see the violation notice?" He handed me the paper wordlessly, his expression a mixture of shame and resignation. The notice cited 3 separate violations, totaling $450 in fines for unauthorized plants, improper tool storage, and failure to maintain aesthetic standards. Each charge was groundless under any reasonable interpretation of the actual guidelines. "She has never bothered with my garden before," Mr. Chen said quietly. "But last week I spoke at the meeting about the assessment. I asked questions about where the money would go." He shook his head slowly. "Now this." I helped Mr. Chen to a nearby bench and assured him we would address this injustice. As he walked back to his apartment, I immediately called an emergency meeting of our core team. That evening, as we gathered to discuss the incident with Mr. Chen, alarming news spread through our network. Multiple residents, specifically those who had spoken against Patricia at recent meetings or questioned board decisions, had received formal eviction notices for various alleged violations. The timing was unmistakable. This was coordinated retaliation. "She must have identified our coalition," Elena suggested fearfully. "Someone must have talked." "No," I replied after reviewing the notices. "This is desperate intimidation. She senses opposition but does not know its extent or organization. She is trying to silence dissent through fear. The eviction notices shared a common thread. All cited obscure bylaw provisions that had never been enforced previously. All targeted residents from minority groups or those on fixed incomes who would struggle to fight legally. All provided only the minimum legally required time to cure alleged violations before formal eviction proceedings would begin. "We cannot wait any longer," I declared to the group. "These evictions will displace vulnerable residents within weeks if we do not act." After consulting with our legal team, I formally invoked the rarely used bylaw provision allowing property owners to call emergency HOA meetings. As both a property owner and resident, I had standing to make this request. The board would be legally required to schedule this meeting within 10 days. Patricia and her allies tried everything to block the meeting. First came claims that my paperwork was improperly filed. When that failed, they attempted to schedule the meeting for a Tuesday morning when most working residents could not attend. Our legal team countered each maneuver, citing specific bylaw provisions that the board had conveniently ignored for years. Finally, the meeting was set for 7:00 p.m. the following Thursday. Patricia controlled the official notification process, sending out the bare minimum required notice with vague language about addressing resident concerns. Our coalition implemented our own communication strategy. Anonymous invitations appeared under every door in the community. Important community meeting, your home, your voice, your rights. Thursday, 7:00 p.m. Decisions affecting your financial future will be made. Please attend. Patricia was furious. Security cameras captured her removing invitations from doors and questioning residents about their source. Her increasingly frantic attempts to identify the organizers only highlighted her growing panic as caught. Raws slipped away. As Thursday approached, tension throughout the community reached unprecedented levels. Residents who had remained silent for years whispered in hallways and parking lots. Board members avoided public areas. Patricia was spotted entering and leaving the HOA office at unusual hours, often carrying boxes of documents. The groundwork was laid. The evidence was organized. The legal team was prepared. All that remained was the confrontation that would finally expose the truth to the entire community. For the first time in years, many residents felt something long-forgotten hope that change was possible. The kingdom Patricia had built through fear and manipulation stood on the verge of collapse, and she could sense it crumbling beneath her feet. Thursday evening arrived with palpable tension throughout the community. I reached the community center 30 minutes before the scheduled meeting time and found a scene unprecedented in recent memory. Residents streamed in steadily, filling rows of chairs that normally sat mostly empty during HOA meetings. Many faces I had never seen at previous gatherings appeared: elderly residents, working parents, minority community members who had historically avoided these meetings due to hostile treatment. By 6:55 p.m., every seat was filled. People stood along walls and spilled into the hallway outside. The room hummed with nervous energy as neighbors who rarely interacted beyond polite nods found themselves united by common purpose. Patricia arrived with her board members precisely at 7:00 p.m., her composure visibly shaken at the unexpected turnout. She whispered urgently to the HOA secretary, who shrugged helplessly while gesturing at the crowd. "This meeting of the Oakwood Gardens Homeowners Association will come to order," Patricia announced, struggling to maintain her authoritative tone. "We have a single agenda item tonight addressing concerns raised by some residents regarding community policies." She emphasized some residents with thinly veiled contempt, then continued, "We will allow brief comments, limited to 2 minutes each, after which the board will take these concerns under advisement for future consideration." Her attempt to control the narrative was immediately challenged. "Point of order," called a voice from the middle of the room. All heads turned to see James Washington, the professor from Building D, standing confidently. The HOA bylaws, Section 5.3, clearly state that emergency meetings called by property owners must address the specific concerns raised in the meeting request. Those concerns must be resolved, not merely taken under advisement. Patricia's face flushed. "You are out of order. The board determines meeting procedures." "Actually," James continued calmly, "the bylaws specify that Robert's Rules of Order govern all proceedings. I move that we follow the proper procedure for an emergency meeting." "Second," called multiple voices simultaneously. Patricia glanced at the board's treasurer, who reluctantly nodded confirmation. She was cornered by her own rules. "Very well," she conceded icily. "The resident who called this meeting may present their concerns." This was my moment. I stood and moved to the front of the room, feeling hundreds of eyes following my movement. Patricia registered mild confusion at seeing the problematic new tenant taking center stage, but showed no sign of recognizing my true role yet. "Thank you, Ms. Wilkins," I began politely. "My name is Alexander Mitchell. Some of you know me as a recent resident of Building E." I paused, making eye contact with residents throughout the room before continuing. "However, I should introduce myself properly. My legal name is Jonathan Alexander Mitchell, and I am the owner of all 7 buildings comprising Oakwood Gardens. I purchased this property 3 months ago." The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Patricia's face drained of color as she gripped the edge of the table before her. "That is impossible," she stammered. "We would have been informed of any ownership change." "The notification was delivered to the HOA office 7 weeks ago," I replied calmly, producing documentation from my briefcase. "It appears the information was never shared with residents, perhaps an oversight." I handed copies of the property transfer documents to each board member. Patricia stared at the papers, her composure crumbling visibly. I moved into Unit 214, not as a landlord inspecting his property, but as a resident experiencing life in this community firsthand. What I discovered was deeply troubling. I nodded to James, who activated a projection screen at the front of the room. What followed was a methodically organized presentation of evidence gathered over months of investigation. Security camera footage showed Patricia selectively enforcing rules, ignoring violations by certain residents, while documenting identical issues for others. Financial record revealed systematic misappropriation of HOA funds to companies connected to board members. Side-by-side comparisons demonstrated discriminatory treatment in approval processes for renovations, landscaping, and accommodation requests. "This is slander," Patricia interrupted, finding her voice. "These recordings were made without consent. This entire presentation is inadmissible and potentially illegal." Marcus stood from his seat near the front. "As legal counsel for Mr. Mitchell, I can confirm that all evidence presented was obtained through legal means. Security recordings in common areas are explicitly permitted in the HOA bylaws that you yourself approved, Ms. Wilkins." As the presentation continued, residents began sharing their own experiences, no longer intimidated into silence. "You denied my disability accommodation request 3 times," called an elderly woman near the back. You said a handrail would disrupt community aesthetics. You fined me for speaking Spanish to my children in the common areas, added another resident. You called it creating an unwelcoming environment. You had my car towed because my work shift ended after visitor hours, and you refused to issue me a resident parking pass for 6 months, said a young nurse. The personal testimonies continued for nearly 30 minutes, a cathartic outpouring from residents who had suffered silently for years. Patricia and the board members sat in stunned silence as their regime of discrimination and intimidation was laid bare before the entire community. When the room finally quieted, I continued my presentation with the financial evidence. The forensic accountant's findings were projected clearly for all to see: detailed breakdowns of misappropriated funds, kickbacks disguised as service contracts, and the systematic enrichment of Patricia and her allies at the community's expense. The special assessment recently announced would have cost each household $5,000, I explained, pointing to incorporation documents on the screen. The contracting company selected to perform this work was established 3 months ago by Patricia's son-in-law. No competitive bids were sought. By now, Patricia had abandoned any pretense of control. Her face showed a mixture of rage and terror as her carefully constructed kingdom collapsed around her. "You have no right," she finally sputtered. "This community has thrived under my leadership for 15 years. These people," she gestured dismissively toward the minority residents, "would never have been approved for residency under previous ownership. I have maintained standards that protect all our property values." Her mask had finally slipped completely, revealing the prejudice that had driven her actions all along. A collective gasp spread through the room at her explicit admission. "That statement perfectly illustrates the problem," I responded quietly. "This community belongs to all its residents equally. The HOA exists to serve the community, not to impose the personal prejudices of its leadership." I turned to address the assembled residents directly. "As the property owner, I have legal authority to dissolve the current board for breach of fiduciary duty and violation of fair housing laws. However, I believe the power to reshape this community should rest with all of you." With that, I called for a vote of no confidence in the current HOA leadership. The motion was immediately seconded by multiple voices. When hands raised throughout the room, the result was overwhelming. Only Patricia, the board members, and a handful of their closest allies opposed the motion. "By clear majority vote, this board is dissolved, effective immediately," I announced. "An interim board will be established with representatives from all buildings to oversee elections within 30 days. Additionally, a full financial audit will be conducted, and all discriminatory policies will be suspended pending community review." Patricia stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You will regret this," she hissed, gathering her papers. "This community will fall apart without proper leadership." As she stalked toward the exit, I called after her, "Ms. Wilkins, one more thing." She paused without turning. "The HOA offices should be vacated by tomorrow noon, and please remember to return Mr. Chen's gardening tools. They belong to him, not to you." The room erupted in applause as Patricia and her board members fled the scene of their public downfall. As the noise subsided, I could see tears of relief on many faces. Residents who had endured years of harassment finally experiencing the first moments of liberation. The kingdom had fallen, and now the work of building something better could begin.